What happens when beauty and madness collide on the silver screen? When Italian filmmakers of the 60s decided to challenge every moral code known to man. These weren't just films, they were forbidden experiments in art and sin. Tonight, we uncover 15 Italian exploitation films that shocked censors across Europe. From occult rituals to twisted politics and surreal nightmares. Some were banned, some vanished, but all changed cinema forever. Number 15. The Whip in the Body, 1963. When Mario Bava released The Whip in the Body, critics didn't know whether to call it horror or heresy. The film was drenched in gothic atmosphere, with dim candlelight echoing through haunted halls, and a forbidden obsession driving the story forward, starring Christopher Lee in one of his most unsettling roles. It followed a nobleman who returns to his family castle only to awaken dangerous desires and deadly ghosts. Italian censors were outraged by its audacity. Scenes of emotional cruelty and psychological torment were deemed too perverse for public screening. Entire sections were cut, leaving the story fractured and strange. In some countries, it was pulled from theaters within days. The film's erotic undertones, disguised beneath gothic shadows, made it one of the most censored Italian horror tales of the decade. Behind the scenes, Bava fought the censors personally. He argued that his movie was a tragedy, not a scandal. But the authorities refused to listen, forcing distributors to rename it What, just to distance it from controversy. Over time, fans rediscovered it, calling it an early masterpiece of Italian Gothic expressionism. What once scandalized the world now stands as a haunting reflection on repression, obsession, and guilt. The very things Italy's censors feared most. Number 14. Mondo Cane, 1962. When Mondo Cane premiered, audiences weren't ready. The title meant A Dog's World, and that is exactly how it felt. Savage, cruel, and disturbingly real. Directed by Paolo Cavara, Gualtiero Jacopetti, and Franco Prosperi, it wasn't fiction at all, but a shocking documentary collage, exposing humanity's strangest rituals, from remote tribes to modern cities. Critics accused it of turning human suffering into spectacle. Italian censors panicked, calling it immoral, indecent, and unpatriotic. The film showed funerals, beauty contests, and bizarre ceremonies with the same cold detachment, leaving viewers disturbed and fascinated. It blurred the line between journalism and voyeurism, igniting riots in some countries and bans in others. Behind the scenes, the filmmakers faced threats and lawsuits. They insisted their goal was truth, to show civilization's hypocrisy through unfiltered images. But officials saw only chaos and danger. The Vatican condemned it as blasphemous, claiming it degraded the human soul. Yet despite outrage, Mondo Cane became a worldwide hit, spawning the entire Mondo genre, a style of documentary exploitation that mixed horror shock and anthropology. It inspired copycats from Japan to America, and even earned an Academy Award nomination for its haunting theme song. Today, its legacy is divided. Some call it a masterpiece of bold filmmaking. Others see it as the birth of cinematic exploitation itself. Number 13. The Girl Who Knew Too Much, 1963. Before Dario Argento, there was Mario Bava again, the man who invented the modern Italian thriller. The Girl Who Knew Too Much is often hailed as the first true giallo film. Stylish, dangerous, and laced with paranoia, it followed an American tourist in Rome who witnesses a murder and is drawn into a labyrinth of lies and obsession. At first glance, it seemed like a harmless mystery, but beneath its bright cinematography lay subversive commentary about voyeurism and female independence. The heroine wasn't a helpless victim, but a woman defying authority in a city that wanted to silence her. This bold portrayal of gender power unsettled censors. They demanded cuts to dialogue and scenes suggesting moral corruption. Bava's crew shot guerrilla style in Rome without proper permits, risking arrest almost daily. Producers feared the film would fail after its first screenings were met with confusion. Italian critics dismissed it as too American, while foreign distributors trimmed it further for conservative audiences. Decades later, cinephiles rediscovered it. They saw in its shadows the birth of an entire cinematic movement. The Giallo. From Argento to Fulci, the DNA of Italian horror began here. What began as a censored mystery became the cornerstone of modern suspense. The film's whispered tension proved that fear, censorship, and desire were inseparable parts of Italian cinema's beating heart. Number 12. Black Sabbath, 1963. Mario Bava returned once again to challenge moral order and studio patience with Black Sabbath, A film that was meant to terrify, but ended up terrifying Italian censors more than its audience. This anthology featured 3 stories each, dripping with dread and atmosphere. It starred Boris Karloff himself, guiding viewers through a nightmare that mixed ghosts' revenge and forbidden lust. The censors couldn't handle it. They declared that its tone was dangerously morbid. One story about a woman haunted by a corpse was considered too realistic. Another, involving a call from a mysterious lover late at night, was branded obscene. The American distributor AIP went further and completely reshuffled the order of stories, cut out lines, and redubbed Karloff's narration to make it less suggestive. Behind the camera, Bava was heartbroken. He had crafted a delicate balance between horror and dark beauty. What reached foreign screens was a mutilated version stripped of its rhythm and menace. Yet, despite censorship, Black Sabbath grew into legend. The film influenced everyone from Roger Corman to Quentin Tarantino, and even inspired the British heavy metal band to take its name. Over the decades, critics restored its reputation, calling it a hypnotic study of fear, guilt, and temptation. What the censors once tried to bury now stands tall as one of Italian horror's most poetic visions, a reminder that the scariest thing about Black Sabbath wasn't the ghosts, but the moral panic they awakened. Number 11. The Gospel. According to St. Matthew, 1964, when Pier Paolo Pasolini, a self-proclaimed atheist and social rebel, announced he would adapt the story of Christ-Italian conservatives prepared for war. The result was The Gospel, according to St. Matthew, a film that felt both sacred and revolutionary. Shot in a neo-realist style, using non-professional actors, Pasolini's Christ was human, raw, and political. The church's reaction was explosive. Religious authorities accused Pasolini of blasphemy before the film even premiered. Censors demanded to preview every frame, terrified that he would turn the Bible into an act of rebellion. Yet when it screened at Venice, it shocked everyone by receiving applause from both critics and the clergy. The Vatican later praised it for its sincerity and faithfulness, a twist no one saw coming. Behind the scenes, Pasolini filmed in the poorest parts of Italy, casting a Spanish student as Jesus. His approach rejected Hollywood gloss for spiritual realism. Officials still tried to ban it in certain regions, claiming its Marxist undertones threatened national identity. Pasolini endured insults from politicians and priests alike. Over time, the movie became a sacred text for filmmakers. It proved that art could wrestle with divinity without losing its humanity. Pasolini's vision of faith, stripped of glamour and filled with pain, was too radical for the 60s, yet timeless in its impact. In trying to censor him, Italy only sanctified him. Number 10. The Wild Eye, 1967. In the late 60s, Italian exploitation cinema turned its camera toward itself. The Wild Eye, directed by Paolo Cavara, one of the men behind Mondo Cane, told the story of a documentarian obsessed with capturing violence at any cost. What began as a critique of media sensationalism became a mirror too disturbing for Italian authorities to face. Censors denounced it for showing cruelty and moral decay under the disguise of art. They claimed it mocked national institutions and glorified human misery. In truth, Cavara had crafted a bitter confession, an attack on the exploitation he had helped invent. The film portrayed filmmakers as predators, turning pain into profit. It was banned in multiple regions before quietly disappearing from theaters. Behind the scenes, Cavara fought with producers who wanted to make it bloodier. He refused, choosing psychology over shock. That refusal cost him distribution. Critics at the time dismissed the film as cynical and unwatchable. Only years later did it resurface as a prophetic vision of media ethics, predicting the reality TV era long before it existed. Today, The Wild Eye feels frighteningly modern. Its message is clear. When art turns suffering into entertainment, the line between truth and exploitation vanishes. Cavara paid for his honesty with censorship, exile, and silence. Yet, his film remains one of Italy's boldest reflections on the cost of seeing too much. Number 9. The Witch. La Strega in Amore, 1966. Damiano Damiani's The Witch wasn't your usual tale of broomsticks and curses. It was a slow-burning psychological nightmare that wrapped desire and decay in the same spell. The film followed a weary historian who accepts an invitation to catalog an old library, only to fall under the strange influence of a mysterious woman and her eerie household. Censors didn't know how to define it. It wasn't horror in the traditional sense, but its themes of manipulation and forbidden temptation were too dangerous for Italian morality boards. They claimed the film's portrayal of female dominance and emotional corruption was obscene. Scenes where charm and menace intertwined were trimmed beyond recognition. In some regions, distributors added new titles to disguise its meaning, calling it Strange Obsession or The Witch in Love. Behind the scenes, Damiani struggled to balance beauty with menace. He wanted to expose male weakness and societal hypocrisy through a story of supernatural seduction. Critics were divided. Some called it boring. Others whispered that it was genius hidden under metaphor. The church condemned it for blurring spiritual and carnal forces. Over the years, The Witch gained a new life among art house fans, who recognized its subtle menace. It stood not as a ghost story, but as a mirror of Italy's repression during the 60s. A time when censorship wasn't just about what was seen, but about what couldn't be said. Number 8. The 10th Victim, La Decima Vittima, 1965. In an age obsessed with conformity, Elio Petri imagined a future where killing became entertainment. The 10th Victim was part science fiction, part satire, and entirely scandalous. Starring Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress, it depicted a society where murder had become televised sport, a world of fashion violence and fame. Italian officials were outraged. The Ministry of Culture warned that it glorified amorality and mocked human life. Censors demanded cuts to scenes of futuristic decadence, calling them corrupting for youth. Critics were split between calling it brilliant and depraved. The idea of mixing glamour with death felt too close to home for a country still reeling from post-war trauma. Behind the camera, Petri designed a candy-colored nightmare filled with modernist architecture and pop art aesthetics. He saw the future not as freedom, but as marketing, where even death could be sold. The film's producers feared losing funding as sponsors withdrew under moral pressure. Yet the movie became a cult sensation abroad, influencing films like The Running Man and even television's fascination with reality violence. In Italy, it remained a symbol of discomfort, a film too sharp for its own time. Its message survived every censorship cut. When entertainment kills empathy, civilization is already dead. Petri's vision didn't predict the future, it exposed it. Number 7. The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave, 1971. Though slightly beyond the 60s in release, The Night Evelyn Came Out of the Grave was conceived and filmed during the final years of the decade. Directed by Emilio Miraglia, it was an Italian Gothic shocker filled with decadent mansions, hallucinations, and guilt. It told of a wealthy man haunted by his dead wife's memory and by his own madness. Censors tore it apart. They claimed its imagery was excessive, its themes too depraved for audiences. Scenes of psychological torture and twisted mourning were cut or reshot. In some regions, the film was banned outright. Critics branded it as obscene trash, yet beneath the hysteria lay a striking metaphor for post-war male fragility and societal decay. Behind the scenes, production was chaos. Miraglia's producers wanted more sensationalism, while the director sought artful dread. The Clash produced one of the most fragmented yet hypnotic works of Italian Gothic cinema. Actors recalled shooting scenes twice, once for art and once for censorship. Over time, Evelyn became a midnight favorite for cinephiles, drawn to its surreal rhythm and dream logic. Its reputation grew as a forbidden relic of an era when Italian filmmakers risked everything to challenge the hypocrisy of their culture. What was once banned now feels prophetic. A film about the ghosts we create when we bury truth under fear. Number 6. The Faceless Monster, 1965. Also known internationally as The Monster of Venice. This chilling noir horror hybrid, directed by Lindsay Shonteff, blended detective mystery and gothic terror in a way that Italian censors found deeply unsettling. Set in the misty canals of Venice, it followed a police inspector hunting a mysterious killer whose victims vanished beneath the water. What began as a straightforward crime story turned into something stranger and darker. The film's tone was drenched in decay. Murders took place in empty palazzos and ruined chapels, while the city itself seemed haunted by guilt. Italian authorities argued that it glorified madness and cruelty. They demanded the removal of sequences showing corpses pulled from canals and scenes implying corruption within the church. Distributors reluctantly complied, leaving gaps that made the narrative confusing, yet strangely poetic. Behind the scenes, chaos ruled. The production ran out of funds halfway through, forcing Shonteff to improvise entire scenes using fog and darkness to hide unfinished sets. Local officials tried to shut down filming more than once, claiming it was damaging Venice's reputation. Critics dismissed it as vulgar trash. but later scholars praised it for capturing the moral rot of a post-war generation trying to hide its scars behind beauty. Over decades, the Faceless Monster developed cult status. Restored Prince revealed its dreamlike rhythm and tragic heart. What once terrified censors for its portrayal of death now fascinates viewers for its bleak humanity. Venice became the perfect metaphor, a floating city built on secrets, sinking slowly into silence. In the end, the real monster wasn't the killer in the mask. It was the society, too afraid to face its reflection. Number 5. Cannibal Holocaust's spiritual predecessor, Africa, Addio, 1966. Before the world recoiled at Cannibal Holocaust, there was Africa Addio, a pseudo-documentary so shocking it was banned in multiple countries, directed by Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi, the same men behind Mondo Cane. It documented Africa's violent transition from colonial rule to independence. But what they called a documentary, the world called a nightmare. Shot across several African nations, Africa Addio captured executions, massacres, and the brutal aftermath of empire. The filmmakers insisted they were merely witnesses. Censors didn't agree. In Italy, government officials accused them of exploiting tragedy and spreading racial hatred. The footage was confiscated and re-edited without consent. Critics labeled it immoral journalism, and activists worldwide called for its destruction. Behind the lens, the crew faced real danger. They were arrested in Tanzania and accused of espionage. Their raw footage of human suffering horrified even seasoned editors. Yet, the directors refused to sanitize history. Their defiance cost them everything: public disgrace, bans across Europe, and even death threats. Years later, the film resurfaced at underground screenings. Scholars now view it as a grim testament to colonial guilt, both daring and disturbing. Whether it documented truth or manipulated it remains an open wound in cinema history. What cannot be denied is its power. Africa Addio tore away the comfortable illusions of civilization. Italian authorities tried to silence it, but by doing so, they immortalized it. In trying to hide the chaos of the modern world, they revealed how fragile morality truly was. Number 4. The Devil's Commandment, 1956, reissued 1962. Riccardo Frida's. The Devil's Commandment was one of Italy's earliest attempts to revive the Gothic genre after the war, and by the early 60s, it had returned to shock new audiences. The film followed a scientist obsessed with reviving the dead, and the eerie consequences that followed. When reissued in 1962, it was met with outrage by censors, who declared it too dangerous for the youth. The movie's re-release coincided with renewed church crackdowns on horror cinema. Authorities claimed the film's depiction of forbidden knowledge and dark resurrection mocked sacred teachings. Entire scenes involving occult rituals were ordered to be removed. Distributors reluctantly obeyed, but bootleg copies began circulating in underground cinemas, drawing even bigger crowds. Behind the scenes, Frida clashed with producers who feared blasphemy charges. He defended the film as a modern parable about science and sin. Actors remembered filming eerie laboratory scenes in freezing conditions inside abandoned hospitals. The oppressive atmosphere translated directly to screen, giving the movie its haunting realism. When the Vatican condemned it, officially, newspapers called it a danger to public morality. Audiences, however, were fascinated. They saw it as rebellion disguised as horror. Critics dismissed it for years, until the late 70s, when scholars re-examined it as the cornerstone of Italian horror's rebirth. Today, The Devil's Commandment stands as both an artifact of fear and a symbol of defiance. What began as a simple monster tale became a confrontation with authority itself. Frida's cursed scientist wasn't just raising the dead, he was raising forbidden ideas from the grave. And that was something Italian censors could never forgive. Number 3. The Angels of Terror, 1967, directed by Cesare Cannavaro. The Angels of Terror was unlike anything Italian audiences had seen. It mixed crime thriller elements with avant-garde surrealism, creating a film that was as confusing as it was hypnotic. The story followed a group of revolutionaries who turned to violence in the name of liberation, only to discover that their leader was more dangerous than the system they fought. Italian authorities were alarmed. Censors accused the film of inciting rebellion and glorifying anarchy. Its bold dialogue about corruption and state control hit too close to home in an Italy still haunted by political unrest. The Ministry of Culture demanded heavy cuts to scenes involving torture and interrogation. When Cannavaro refused, the film was pulled from distribution in several provinces. Behind the scenes, the chaos matched the movie's energy. Cannavaro shot guerrilla style across Milan, using real student protesters as extras without permits. Police intervened multiple times during filming, believing they were witnessing genuine riots. The result was raw and unsettling. Critics branded it incoherent. Audiences walked out. But a small cult audience saw its brilliance. A fever dream that predicted the political violence of the coming decade. Over the years, the Angels of Terror became a rare artifact, traded on black market reels, and later restored by independent archives. Its imagery of broken ideals and collapsing faith still feels prophetic. The censors silenced it for being too loud, too real, and too modern. Today, it stands as a time capsule of rebellion. A film that dared to expose the monsters hiding in power. Number 2. The Naked Violence, 1960s. 9. Fernando de Leo's The Naked Violence exploded onto screens with ferocity. Based loosely on a real crime, the film told of a teacher murdered by her students, and the detective who tried to understand why. But de Leo wasn't interested in simple crime. He wanted to dissect a society built on repression, hypocrisy, and poverty. What emerged was a movie so brutal, so honest, that it became one of the most censored films in Italian history. Authorities accused De Leo of corrupting youth and glorifying violence. Police raided screenings in several cities. Scenes showing interrogations and social decay were cut entirely. The film was slapped with the dreaded "forbidden to minors" label. Television banned it for decades. Critics called it sick and nihilistic, while audiences whispered that it told the truth about Italy's moral collapse. Behind the camera, De Leo faced constant threats from both studio executives and politicians. He was told to tone down the realism or lose funding. He refused. He shot in real slums with non-professional actors and used documentary-style techniques that gave every frame a sense of painful authenticity. Years later, The Naked Violence was hailed as a masterpiece of the poliziotteschi movement, Italian crime cinema at its most confrontational. What censors once buried became required viewing for film students around the world. De Leo exposed a truth too raw for 60s audiences to face. When a nation hides its violence behind order, the violence eventually takes the stage. Number 1. Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975, conceived in 1969. No discussion of Italian exploitation and censorship can end without Pier Paolo Pasolini's most infamous creation. Though released in 1975, Salo, or The 120 Days of Sodom, was conceived in the final years of the 60s, when Pasolini began writing it as a response to Italy's growing fascism of comfort and consumerism. Inspired by the writings of the Marquis de Sade, it relocated the tale to the final days of Mussolini's republic. A group of powerful men imprison youths and subject them to horrors that reflect political corruption, moral decay, and the loss of humanity. Censors immediately called it the most obscene film ever made. Many countries banned it outright. Copies were seized, burned, or locked away. Pasolini himself faced death threats before the film's release. Behind the scenes, production was plagued by fear and exhaustion. Actors signed secrecy contracts. Sets were raided by police, searching for evidence of indecency. Pasolini explained that it wasn't a film about cruelty, but about the death of compassion in a society addicted to obedience. Few believed him. Weeks before the film's premiere, Pasolini was murdered under mysterious circumstances, run down and beaten on a deserted beach. Some believe it was revenge for Salo. Others call it coincidence. Either way, the film became myth. Today, Salo remains. Banned in multiple countries, yet studied endlessly. It is cinema's darkest mirror, forcing viewers to confront power unchecked and humanity undone. Pasolini's final act was to show what censorship fears most: truth stripped of illusion. These films didn't just shock censors. They challenged what it meant to see, feel, and think. Italy's exploitation era turned rebellion into art and horror into history. Which of these forbidden visions do you dare to watch today? Tell us in the comments. Like, subscribe, and join us next time as we unveil more hidden corners of cinema's darkest past.